Hey everyone, how's it going? Mark here. Today we're going to be looking at rune enchantments for bows and other ranged weapons. I guess we're going to be doing this one a little bit differently than the other enchantments, and for this one I kind of decided to order the enchantments based on different archer archetypes, let's say. So, the first archetype is like a crit archer. So if you're a crit archer, I think your go-to runes are either Rune of Carnage, Rune of Slaying, Rune of Havoc. So if you're looking for the highest damage potential on the bows, your go-to rune should be the Rune of Slaying. Your critical damage done by your bows and weapons scale based on the maximum damage of the weapon. So mathematically speaking, Rune of Slaying is better than Rune of Carnage, which increases the critical damage by 60%. I believe the case is a little bit different for any guns. In that case, if you're trying to get as much damage as possible from the guns, then you're gonna be better off with Rune of Carnage. And then lastly, we have the option of Rune of Havoc, and this one increases the chance to deal critical hit by 8%. And I would say this one is just kind of preferential. If you just want to like go the damage route, or if you just want to have like more consistent crits with Rune of Havoc. So up to you, really. Another damage archer is the one that's like focusing on bypassing armor, and usually you play it with a crossbow, right? Or you could also just play it with like a Black Skaven shuriken archer. For this archetype, you probably use the Rune of Perforation, which just kind of gives you 12% target's armor absorption. If you are in a situation where your support team, for example, has Mastery Armor Break, and you don't need like any additional armor bypass, in that case, you can also just increase the DPS of your archer by, again, going for the Rune of Slaying. This also scales, of course, with the bonus damage from the ballistic skill. If you increase the maximum damage, you also increase the average damage mathematically. Sometimes with damage archers, you may also face teams which stack high amounts of range resistance. In that case, for the armor bypass archer, I would go for the Rune of Perseverance. So this one is like when a damaging attack or offensive skill misses, you gain a hit chance bonus of 6% for 3 turns. So you're gonna get the most out of this rune if you spam as many attacks as possible, and I think that's exactly what armor bypass archer does. I would also, for example, run this on a marksman, because marksman already has like a passive, which is essentially if you miss, you get like plus 10% hit chance. So I like also just putting this on a marksman, because in this case, if let's say you miss twice, right, you're gonna be at 32% plus hit chance. A Rune of Perseverance just kind of helps you get to 95% hit chance faster. That's kind of the idea for a damage archer. There is also a possibility for a armor bypass archer to go for Rune of Devotion, which reduces the initiative by 13, and it essentially just kind of gives you bigger window for 2-turning. I believe crossbow is already like -10. Yeah, you can see crossbow is already like -10 initiative, so you would start at like -22 initiative. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if I would actually use it, but it's definitely usable, you know? That's kind of like the use case scenario there. I think it could be relevant in some PvP matches, but I don't know. I think you're probably just better off with something else, in my opinion. Okay, the next one is kind of interesting. This archetype is Headshot Archer, which is just kind of focused on landing headshots against enemy. So for this one, I wouldn't use the... where is it? We've talked about like one We've talked about like Rune of Perseverance, which increases your hit chance. If you're playing a headshot archer, I think it's better for you to go for the Rune of Precision, because in this case you are paying for a very expensive shot and you want to make sure it lands. Essentially, when you're doing a headshot, you're just trying to do it on your first try, right? You're just specializing in that one shot, and if that one shot misses, then things are just kind of ruined. So in this case, I would probably be using either Rune of Precision, which increases range hit chance by 8%, or you could be also using a Rune of Flight. So let me see it. It's this one. So this one increases range hit chance by 20% when standing on higher ground than the target. A lot of people really like this rune. Personally, I'm not a fan, just because when I'm playing Mordheim, and when I try to go for that higher ground, very often it happens that once I reach that higher ground, I then realize that I don't actually have the angle to like take down the enemy, so that can be an issue. The other issue with Rune of Flight is that some maps, or like the way the map generates, there is no real like high ground that you could go to that would just make sense. So I don't know. I think this one is just kind of questionable in my opinion. All right. Yeah. And one other rune for headshot archers, I would consider also the Rune of Misfortune. So this one is when dealing damage, reduce the target's stun resistance by 8% for 3 turns, and this one is stackable. So if you are in a situation where you are facing an enemy who has a very high stun resistance, I would start looking into the Rune of Misfortune, so that instead of like spamming headshots on the target, first you would just like do some basic attacks with Rune of Misfortune, and then maybe try to stun that creature or whatever you're trying to face with a Rune of Misfortune. So yeah, I think these are just kind of the options for the headshot archer. Then the next archer archetype that you have is like a support skill shot archer. So it's like a support archer that specializes in skill shots. So we're talking about like a crippling shot, we're talking about a knee shot, we're also talking about a nerve shot, right? So here, I think it's just kind of like a similar logic. So in this case, I think you kind of do want to just focus on just trying to hit, because you're using like skill shots, you're gonna be using more offensive points and you're gonna have like less shots overall, so it becomes more important to land those shots. So in this case, I would probably also just go for the Rune of Precision, or I would also consider the Rune of Flight again, though I already mentioned what I think about that. Another one to consider is also like Rune of Enfeeblement, with this archer archetype. So when dealing damage, receive a 90% chance to remove 1 offense point from the target. And I think this can be like very relevant for crippling shot archers. Rune of Enfeeblement and crippling shots can be very powerful for first strikes. Like, let's say there's like a situation where the enemy takes turn and then they go into an ambush stance. Let's say it's a demon, right? So this demon still has like 8 offense points or something like that, And if you start attacking this demon is gonna like auto attack you back, and you're gonna be taking damage from him. So what you can do is you can just shoot 3 times with crippling shot this demon, because crippling shot not only removes like the maximum offense points from the target, it also removes like temporary offense points that the target currently has. So if you have like a Rune of Enfeeblement with these 3 shots, you could potentially remove like all of the offensive points, and like you wouldn't take any counterattack damage from this demon, right? When you engage it for the first time. So that's why I think Rune of Enfeeblement can be good for the support archer archetype. Another support archer archetype is one that just focuses on shooting the basic shots, and it's just trying to do some sort of a debuff. So for example, Rune of Enfeeblement is also like potentially a thing you could run on this sort of an archer archetype. You can also run, for example, Rune of Enervation on your archers, on your support archers. So let's say that you have like 2 warlocks and they're like very important, they're critical to your team comp. It's your way of dealing damage. So what do you get countered by? You get countered by magic resistance on the enemy team. So you have essentially this support archer in order to deal with this like magic resistance and to lower that magic resistance. So that's like one way to do it. Another one is also like Rune of Dismay. Now let me see it. Yeah. So this one is when dealing damage, reduces the target's chance to pass all alone fear and terror tests by 8% for 3 turns, and it's stackable. There's also like a headgear enchantment, which is Headgear of Dismay, and in that case you're gonna be like reducing the all alone fear and terror test by 16%, and this is just like a kind of a way for you to deal with Serenity tanks, but also I think there could be like potentially a team comp for the undead which kind of focuses on making enemies, or like making enemies fail there all alone, and in that case like enemies should just become like stunned, like CC'd by failing it all alone. That could be like an interesting thing to play, I guess. Another rune that you could be playing for the basic shot support archetype is Rune of Distraction. So Rune of Distraction is like when dealing range damage, receive a 30% chance to break any stance taken by the target. So this is just kind of like a nerf shot, but it's just kind of like all about luck, I guess. I wouldn't use this on like hero archers. I think I would just consider using this on like henchmen archers, because henchmen archers, they don't really have access to mastery nerf shot. Rune of Distraction is a way for you to simulate like nerf shot, and like what is the chance if you're like hitting like 3 times, right? I mean, let's calculate it. Actually, I'm curious, like, how often this does not trigger. If, let's say, you're gonna be shooting 3 times with Rune of Distraction, the chance for you to not break anything with the Rune of Distraction with 3 shots is 34%, right? So you have like 66% chance to just break a stance, which is like quite decent when you think about this mathematically. Okay, next one that we have is Rune of Venom. And this one I would just kind of consider using on a poisoner, so like any Skaven, and combined it with their own poisons and so on. Yeah, just like poison shurikens essentially. So this one is when dealing damage, the target's poison resistance is reduced by 8% for 3 turns, and it's stackable. It's quite important for like the poison builds, because like for the enemy it's usually like it's relatively easy to stack up poison resistance out of nowhere. Some people also just kind of like building caster archers. For this we have Rune of Spellbinding. So this one is when casting spells increase spell damage by 20%. Usually when people go for the bow build though, they kind of like just want to go for the Rune of Enervation. Yeah. So they just kind of like try to make up that if somebody has too high of a magic resistance, in that case they can at least just shoot their bow to make up for, that weakness, I guess. And we have also like Rune of Conspiracy. This one increases the chance to trigger Tzeentch's Curse or Divine Wrath and to successfully cast spells by 20%. I wouldn't use it on any caster. Maybe if, what do you call it? Maybe if Doomweaver could have like range weapons, then it could be a consideration, but I don't think it's worth it ultimately. So yeah. And right, there's also like an enchantment which is called Rune of Warding, and this one increases magic resistance by 20%. It's just like if you know you're gonna be facing an enemy warband that's specializing in magic, you can definitely go ahead and use it as like a sort of a magic hate if there are like no other runes which are important to you. Then we have also like a weird archer, let's say, and that has to deal with Rune of Surprise. So this one increases the damage of ambush and Overwatch attacks by 90%. So it's just like just those Overwatch attacks. I think if you're trying to make the most use out of Rune of Surprise, you're gonna get like the most out of it by playing guns, because guns have the best damage scaling. I think, you know, if you want to do that, I would play with guns, but I don't know. I think it's just kind of a meme, in my opinion. Um, yeah, it's funny, but I think it's just kind of a meme. All right, thanks for watching. Take care and bye bye.